I worked the night shift at an abandoned lighthouse. My boss told me it was just for insurance purposes, nothing more. Keep an eye on the place, check the logbook, don't let the storm damage get worse. Easy money, right? That's what I thought, until I found the binder in the control room. It wasn't maintenance logs. It was rules, 11 of them, written in thick black marker, some words underlined so hard the paper nearly tore. The first one said, "Never answer the knocking after midnight. It isn't the wind." And I swear to you, last night at 12:03 a.m., I heard someone knocking on the iron door 3 stories below me. Slow, heavy, patient. The thing is, the door was already chained shut from the inside. Asterisk, when I first got the job, I thought it was a joke, or maybe one of those weird seasonal gigs people post online just to lure in desperate workers. The ad was short, simple, almost suspiciously plain. Night caretaker needed. Blackthorn Point Lighthouse, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. for $100 per shift. Cash. That was it. No benefits, no phone number, just an email. I'd been broke for months, running on ramen noodles and overdue rent, and something about the offer. Yeah, it stank of sketchy desperation, but it also stank of opportunity, and at the time I didn't care which was stronger. I sent my resume, or what passed for one, and got a reply in less than an hour. "You're hired. Report to the lighthouse at dusk. Bring warm clothes." That was all. No interview, no background check. I should have been suspicious, but I was too busy counting how fast $400 a night could pull me out of debt. The drive there was already strange enough to feel wrong. Blackthorn Point wasn't on most maps. I had to follow a set of directions copied and pasted into the email. Roads narrowing from cracked asphalt to gravel to something that felt more like a trail than a road. The forest around me grew thicker, the kind of pines that swallowed headlights and leaned toward the car like they wanted to cage it in. By the time I heard the ocean, it was more like a distant animal breathing in the dark than the soothing lull I expected. My GPS gave up 3 miles back, and the only reason I kept going was because I'd seen the light, faint, stuttering. But there, sweeping across the horizon through gaps in the trees. When I finally broke out of the forest, the sight of it froze me. The lighthouse loomed over jagged black cliffs like some dying sentinel, its paint peeled to gray, the glass around the beacon cracked like spider webs. A metal catwalk wrapped the tower, rust bleeding down its sides, and the rocks below were frothing white where the waves tore themselves apart against them. The keeper's house was worse. Boarded windows, shingles missing, door hanging half open like it hadn't been touched in years. I sat in the car with the engine idling, every instinct screaming to turn back. But then I remembered the promise of cash I needed, and told myself it was just a building, just a tower, nothing more. Inside the keeper's house, the smell hit first, damp, salt, and something sour underneath, like mold that had grown too long and turned angry. The entryway was cluttered with old boots, nets, and a half-collapsed wooden chair. My flashlight beam caught wallpaper sagging from moisture, streaks on the ceiling where leaks had gone unfixed. Every creak of the floorboards beneath me sounded like something breathing along in rhythm, and I almost laughed nervously at how much I was psyching myself out. There was a note on the table, though, handwritten, jagged scrawl on yellowing paper. "Caretaker, report to the control room. Log entries on the hour. Do not neglect your post." That was all it said. No name, no signature, just the word caretaker. Like they couldn't be bothered to remember who they'd hired that I hauled my duffel bag up the spiral staircase inside the tower, steps echoing so sharp they made me flinch. The walls were stone, wood in some places, and the air grew colder as I climbed. It felt wrong, like walking into a throat that kept narrowing the higher you went. When I reached the control room, I found the desk, a rotting thing set under, dusty windows, and a single leather binder sitting on top of it. I thought it was just logs, maintenance notes, maybe safety instructions. I flipped it open casually, expecting boring details about oil pressure and bulb replacements. But instead I found page after page of warnings, written in blocky, frantic handwriting. That was the first time I saw the rules that I didn't read them all. Not then. I saw enough to make my skin crawl. Enough to think, this has to be some sick joke. But when I leaned against the desk, the whole room shifted around me. The glass cracked with the sudden boom of the ocean wind, though the windows had already been shattered. The light above my head flickered on, even though I hadn't touched the controls. And for just 1 second, I swore I saw movement in the reflection on the glass. Someone standing on the catwalk outside, though when I spun to look, there was no one. Just the waves and the dark, and a light that kept sweeping like a blind eye searching for something it couldn't find that I sat in. That chair for hours, logging the time as best I could, listening to the building groan around me. Every so often, I'd hear the clang of something metal below, echoing up the spiral staircase, and once I thought I heard footsteps. That wasn't the worst of it, though. Around midnight, when I was fighting to stay awake, I heard the first knock. It wasn't polite, wasn't casual. It was deliberate. 3 slow thuds against the iron door at the base of the tower. My heart nearly stopped, and I told myself it had to be the wind, the sea throwing debris. But then it came again. Pause. 3. Slow. Knocks that I didn't go down to check. I couldn't. Because the binder, the rules, Rule 1 said, clear as blood across the page, never answer the knocking after midnight. It isn't the wind. And, sitting there, hands shaking, I realized someone had written that because they'd heard it too. The second night should have been easier. Most jobs are, once you've gotten used to the new environment. But instead it felt like the tower had learned my name, like it had taken my measure and decided to lean closer. The drive-in was worse. The road that had been gravel and rutted dirt the first night now looked like it had been washed out in places, the forest pressing in more tightly, branches clawing at the side of my car as though the woods didn't want me leaving again. By the time I reached the point, the lighthouse looked even taller, its skeletal frame outlined against a bleeding sunset sky. And for the first time I noticed the way the ocean smelled out here, like iron, sharp and metallic, as though there was blood in the water. When I parked near the house, the air went still, the waves slowed, and I felt a strange kind of silence settle in that wasn't peaceful, wasn't natural. It was the kind of silence that only happens when something is listening. Inside the house, the damp smell had worsened, or maybe I was just more aware of it now. The wallpaper seemed darker, the furniture heavier, and the note on the table, the same one as before, looked fresher, as though the ink had been written just hours ago, even though I knew I hadn't touched it. The tower groaned like it was breathing as I climbed, steps slicker than I remembered, stone walls sweating moisture that dripped onto my hands when I brushed them. I reached the control room, the binder waiting for me like it had been expecting me, sitting dead center on the desk, though I remembered pushing it aside the night before. I sat down, opened my thermos of cheap coffee, and told myself to stop imagining things, stop feeding the paranoia. But then I noticed something. Last night, the logbook had started on page 1. Tonight, when I opened it, it was on a different page, one further along, and scrawled across it was something I hadn't seen before. He's outside tonight. Just those words, jagged and underlined 3 times. I shut it fast, heart racing, and tried to convince myself it had been there all along and I just hadn't noticed. But when I glanced at the cracked glass panes and saw the faint reflection of movement pacing the catwalk outside, my stomach dropped. I told myself it was the gulls, the wind, but no gull walks upright on 2 legs, pausing every few seconds like it was counting the beats of my breath. The hours crawled. Every creak of the wood below made my nerves tighten. Around 10:30, I heard the first real disturbance, a dragging sound, something metallic scraping stone, spiraling up from the staircase like someone was pulling a chain link by link. I forced myself to ignore it, gripping my pen so tight I thought it would snap, writing the time and weather conditions like any normal caretaker would. The noise stopped, but after that, there was a smell, faint but sharp, like wet rust mixed with old seaweed. It clung to the air and made my throat dry. I kept glancing at the clock, and each time I did, the hands seemed off. They'd skip a beat or jump too far, as if the clock itself didn't want me to know how long I'd been trapped in there. Just before midnight, I gave in and touched the binder again, flipping it open to the first pages. The rules were there, exactly as I remembered, but my eyes couldn't stop darting down to the line I hadn't read last night. Rule 1. Never answer the knocking after midnight. It isn't the wind. The letters looked darker, heavier than the others. That was when I realized something had underlined the word never since I last looked at it. Not me, not anyone I'd seen. Something, and right on time, midnight came and the knocking followed. Pause. 3. Measured. Knocks. I froze, pin clattering to the desk, breath shallow. The air in the room pressed in on me, heavy like the tower itself was leaning closer to hear my choice. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knocks came again, slower this time, each one vibrating through the floor like a pulse. And then, silence. I waited, shaking, until I convinced myself it had stopped. But that was when I heard the second sound, the creak of the catwalk outside, footsteps circling the glass windows, slow and careful. I forced myself not to look, staring at the desk, because deep in my bones I knew if I turned my head and locked eyes with whatever was out there, I wouldn't be writing this AT-115. The lights flickered out. Not just the beacon above me, but the small desk lamp, too. The whole tower plunged into darkness. For a moment, I thought the generator had failed, but then the light sputtered back on by itself, weak and sickly yellow. The binder was open too. Another page I hadn't turned, though my hands hadn't left my lap. The rule at the top read, Rule 2, do not trust the logbook. It writes back. I snapped the binder shut, refusing to read further, and sat through the rest of the shift in terrified silence, watching the reflection of that pacing shadow circle me through the cracked windows. At dawn, when I stumbled down the spiral stairs, every step felt heavier, as though the lighthouse didn't want me to leave. The iron door at the base was damp, and when I passed it, I saw something smeared across the inside. 3 handprints, each one too long, too wide, too wrong to be human. I didn't stop to study them. I bolted to my car, shaking so hard I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The forest road seemed darker, the trees leaning further in, and when I looked in my rearview mirror, I swore I saw the faintest strobe of light still sweeping from the tower, though I knew damn well it was supposed to shut off in daylight. I should have quit then. I should have left, ignored the money, and never come back. But $400 is $400, and desperation is a strong anchor. That night, I drove back. The lighthouse was waiting, and when I stepped into the control room again, the binder was already open, pages fluttering like it had been expecting me. The rules were waiting, too, the rest of them still unread. And the knocking, the footsteps, the shadow pacing outside, they were all still there, patient as the tide. By the third night, I was already on edge before I even left the house. Nerves raw, stomach knotted, the thought of another shift gnawing at me like I was walking into a trap I knew I couldn't escape, and yet I still drove out along that narrow forest road, headlights cutting tunnels through trees that seemed thicker and closer than before, branches scraping across the roof like fingers trying to pry me back. The ocean roared louder that evening, a constant low growl that seemed to follow me the entire drive. And when I pulled into the clearing, the lighthouse stood waiting like a corpse that refused to rot, its beacon faintly sputtering even though the sky was still bruised with sunset. I lingered in the car longer than I should have, staring up at the tower, thinking about the knocking, the logbook writing back, the shadows circling the catwalk, and most of all the binder, those pages I'd only glimpsed but never fully read. I couldn't avoid it forever. Something inside me, call it fear, call it curiosity, call it survival, knew that whatever those rules were, they mattered, and that ignoring them was going to get me killed. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me harder than before, salt and damp and that undercurrent of rot, thick enough that I gagged. And for the first time I noticed something new. Scratches along the walls of the keeper's house, long parallel grooves like claws dragging toward the stairs. I didn't linger. I couldn't. My feet carried me up the spiral staircase, every step groaning like a protest. The air colder, heavier, as though the tower itself didn't want me reaching the top. In the control room, the binder was already waiting, dead center. On the desk, open to the very page I'd left off, its edges fluttering though the air was still. My hands shook as I sat down, coffee untouched, pen forgotten, and I forced myself to look, to really look this time, because the only thing worse than knowing the rules existed was living in ignorance of them. The first one I already knew, and seeing it again made my skin crawl. Rule 1, never answer the knocking after midnight. It isn't the wind. The words felt heavier now, not like a warning, but like a command, like someone, or something, had written it with the weight of experience, carved into their bones. Below it, scrawled in the same thick ink, was the second I'd already seen. Rule 2, do not trust the logbook. It writes back. My chest tightened remembering the words that had appeared without my hand, The eerie message. He's outside tonight. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep going, because there were more. Rule 3. If you hear footsteps on the catwalk, do not look out the window. It will know you've seen it. Pause. My eyes flicked instantly to the cracked panes around me, the dark glass just barely reflecting my own pale face, and I felt a crawling sensation run down my back, like something was pacing out there already, waiting for me to slip. I kept reading. Rule 4. Keep the lamp lit at all times between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. If the beacon goes out, do not attempt to relight it until sunrise. The dark is not empty. That one made my breath stutter, because I remembered the second night, how the lights had died just after one, sputtered, then came back. Had I narrowly avoided breaking it? My hands tightened around the pages, knuckles white. As I read on, Rule 5. Do not descend below the 3rd floor after 3 a.m. The stairs are not the same after that hour. The spiral staircase stretched below me like a throat into shadow, and suddenly every step I'd taken down the past 2 mornings replayed in my head. The iron door, the handprints, the sense of being watched. A shiver tore through me, and I had to force myself to turn back to the binder. Rule 6. If the phone rings, never answer it. There is no phone. My throat went dry, eyes darting to the corner of the room where an old, dust-choked rotary phone sat half-buried in shadow, one I swore hadn't been there the night before. Rule 7. At 3:33 a.m. exactly, you may hear your own voice calling from outside. Do not respond. It isn't you. Slow, tense tone. That one nearly broke me, because just reading it conjured the sound in my head, my own voice distorted by salt air, echoing across the cliffs, begging me to come out. I pressed on, stomach turning. Rule 8. Never acknowledge. The keeper's portrait. It watches. I looked instinctively around the room, and that's when I saw it. An oil painting on the far wall, something I had somehow missed for 2 nights straight. The eyes painted dark and glossy, the mouth a thin, disapproving line. The figure wore an old uniform, brass buttons tarnished, caps shadowing its face. And though it was nothing but paint, I swore its gaze shifted the second I looked at it, and my breath grew shallow as I kept reading. Rule 9. If you smell roses, leave immediately. It means she is near. That one made less sense, but the way the word she was written, hard, underlined, gouging into the paper, made my skin prickle with cold dread. Rule 10. Never stay past dawn. If the sun rises while you are still inside, you will not leave. My heart sank at that one, because I thought back to the way the tower seemed to press against me as I tried to leave in daylight. How the walls felt tighter, the stairs steeper, as though it was reluctant to let me go. And then, the final one. Rule 11. Do not write the rules down anywhere else. They belong to the Lighthouse. I froze, pen still on the desk beside me, journal open, and the hairs on my arms rose because it felt like the binder knew I was tempted to copy them, to preserve them, to share them. The implication was clear. These rules weren't just advice. They were binding, alive, a covenant between me and this cursed place that I sat there in silence for a long time. The rules etched into my skull, the storm outside battering the tower, the glass rattling with each wave that smashed against the cliffs below. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. My hands trembled as though I'd already broken one, though I hadn't. At least, not yet. But deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the nausea, beneath the urge to run, a single thought rooted itself in my mind like a splinter. These rules existed for a reason. And if they existed, it meant others had been here before me. Others had sat in this very chair, staring at this very binder, hearing the same knocks, the same footsteps, the same whispers in the dark that I wanted to believe they had survived, that following the rules was enough. But the scratches on the walls, the handprints on the iron door, the painting's shifting eyes, they whispered a different story. They whispered that survival wasn't guaranteed, that the lighthouse wasn't just a place. It was a hunger, and the rules weren't a shield. They were a leash. Pause, lower voice, and I just fastened it around my own neck. The 4th night, I told myself I wouldn't go back. I swore it to myself as I sat in my apartment with the blinds drawn and the TV on mute, every shadow in the room crawling with memory of footsteps and knocks. But when the clock hit 8:30, I was already in my car, already on the road. Like some invisible rope was tugging me back to the cliffs, And the worst part is I didn't even fight it. I just drove, numb, headlights knifing through the forest, the trees bending in closer than ever, the road twisting. In ways I didn't remember, until the horizon broke open and there it was again, the lighthouse standing against the bruised sky like it had been waiting, its beacon sputtering weakly as if it were blinking in recognition of me. The air smelled wrong that night. Thicker, heavier, metallic like rust but sweet underneath, cloying, and it wasn't until I parked and stepped out into the cold salt air that I realized what it was. Roses. Not strong, not choking, just faint, drifting from the tower like an uninvited perfume. My blood ran cold. Rule 9. If you smell roses, leave immediately. It means she is near to, but I didn't leave. I stood frozen, heart jackhammering, every instinct screaming to get back in the car, drive away, never return. But instead I found myself climbing the steps, pulling the heavy wooden door open, and stepping into the sour damp of the keeper's house. The scratches on the wall had deepened, long jagged gouges that reached higher than any person could make, as if something had dragged its claws while standing upright. I told myself not to look, not to think, and I hurried up the spiral staircase, steps echoing, hands slick with sweat despite the chill, until I reached the control room. The binder sat open, of course, pages fluttering, but I didn't go near it. I knew the rules now, and reading them again would only brand them deeper into my mind. I sat at the desk, trying to steady my breathing, to make it through the night by clinging to the rules like lifelines, but it didn't take long for the first test to come. At 11:47, the old rotary phone on the far side of the room began to ring. Pause. The sound cracked through the silence like a scream, mechanical and jarring, and I nearly toppled my chair as I bolted upright. My eyes locked on the dust-caked plastic, the handset vibrating as the shrill ring continued, again and again and again, echoing off the stone walls until it felt like the sound was inside my head. My hand twitched toward it out of instinct, a reflex drilled into every modern person to answer the damn phone, and I had to physically shove my hands into my pockets to stop myself. Rule 6. If the phone rings, never answer it. There is no phone. The rules weren't lying. There was no phone line, no power to that thing, no earthly reason it should be ringing. And yet it kept shrieking until I swore my ears were bleeding. I whispered to myself, "Don't answer, don't answer, don't answer," over and over until suddenly, at the stroke of midnight, it stopped. Silence rushed in so thick it hurt, and I sagged back into the chair, shaking, whispering thanks to no one in particular. But that relief shattered in an instant when the knocking began. Pause. 3. Measured. Knocks. Louder this time, rattling. The floorboards beneath me, coming from the iron door at the base of the tower. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still feel it, reverberating through my bones. And then, like clockwork, the footsteps followed. Slow, deliberate, pacing along the catwalk just outside the windows, circling the tower, each creak of rusted metal in perfect rhythm with the pounding of my heart. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying, "Don't look, don't look." Rule 3. Don't look. But some traitorous part of me needed to know, needed proof, and against every screaming instinct, my eyes flicked sideways to the cracked glass. For the briefest second, I saw it. A figure, tall and wrong, pacing just beyond the glass, its head bent too far, its limbs too long, its body a smear of shadow that bent and shimmered in ways I couldn't process. And then it stopped. The thing froze mid-step, and though its face was just a blur, I felt its attention snap to me, like a hook sinking into my skull that I dropped to the floor instantly, heart hammering, sweat pouring cold down my back, whispering, you looked, you broke it, you broke it." The room seemed to tilt, the air growing heavier, and for the next half hour I didn't dare move, lying there on the cold floorboards listening to something scrape across the glass as though testing the window, testing me. At 2 a.m. the beacon flickered, lights sputtering weakly, and then it went out completely. My breath hitched. Rule 4. Keep the lamp lit at all times between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. If the beacon goes out, do not attempt to relight it until sunrise. The dark is not empty. The room plunged into darkness, and the silence deepened until it wasn't. Silence at all but a pressure, a hum, a void that pressed against my ears. I sat frozen, not daring to touch the controls, not daring to light a candle, because the rules were clear, and though every inch of me wanted light, I knew the dark was not empty. I swear to you, I felt something move in that blackness, brushing against my shoulder, a breath against the back of my neck, the cold press of a hand that lingered just too long before pulling away. When the beacon stuttered back to life at 4:01, I nearly cried with relief, and the control room looked empty again, the glass showing only the storm outside, but I knew I wasn't alone. I never was. At 3:33, just as the rules had warned, I heard it. My voice. Slow, tense tone, it came from the catwalk outside, distorted, muffled by glass and salt wind, but it was my voice all the same, calling my own name, begging, "Let me in, please, let me in." My teeth chattered as I pressed myself against the far wall, hands over my mouth, because I wanted to answer. God help me. I wanted to answer myself, but I stayed silent, every nerve screaming that if I spoke, if I gave even one word, I would no longer be the one inside the tower, be why the time dawn came. I was a wreck, every nerve frayed, every breath shallow. I staggered down the spiral stairs, legs trembling, and for the first time I noticed the steps seemed wrong. Longer, steeper, twisting too far, stretching into shadows that hadn't been there before. I glanced at my watch, 6:12 a.m. The sun was already peeking over the horizon. Rule 10, never stay past dawn. If the sun rises while you are still inside, you will not leave. My chest seized with panic, and I ran, stumbling, nearly falling, scraping my palms bloody against the stone walls as I forced myself down, 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 the staircase warping beneath me, until finally I burst through the iron door and into the pale gray light of morning. The second I stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter, thinner, as though some suffocating weight had lifted from my chest. But when I looked back at the tower, the beacon was still turning, faint, slow, steady, even in the rising sun. That was the morning I realized the rules weren't just warnings. They were chains, designed to keep me bound to this place, to keep me afraid, obedient, controlled. And worse, I knew now that it wasn't just testing me. It was waiting for me to fail, and I already had. The night after the storm should have brought silence, but instead it carried something far worse. A pressure in the air, a heaviness that clung to me like soaked clothes, and the lighthouse itself seemed to hum with a low vibration, as if the stones were remembering voices they shouldn't, and I couldn't tell if it was in my head or if the whole damn place was alive. My body moved on instinct, my boots dragging across the warped wooden floor as I returned to the watch room with my lantern in hand. Though the flames sputtered every time I thought about the rules and how I had broken them one by one, and as the light hit the spiral staircase, I froze, because sitting on the steps was the old brass logbook, the one the keeper before me had supposedly taken when he left, its cover soaked, the ink bleeding into the leather like veins, and I knew without touching it, that it had not been placed there by human hands, yet still my trembling fingers reached out, and when I flipped it open, the pages weren't filled with logs at all, but with names, endless names scratched in uneven handwriting, names I didn't recognize until I saw my own scrawled at the very bottom, fresh, the ink still glistening wet like blood under moonlight, and I dropped it, stumbling backward, my breath ragged, only to hear the low drone of the foghorn. Deep, mournful, wrong, because the storm had passed. There was no fog, yet the horn moaned and carried across the waves, shaking the glass of the lantern until it nearly went out. And through that sound I heard something else woven in, voices chanting, not in English, but in a tongue that felt older than the sea itself, syllables that scraped along my bones and made the hairs on my neck stiffen like needles, and I staggered toward the light chamber, each step harder, as if the stairs were growing longer, stretching like a ribcage wrapping around me. But when I finally reached the top, the great lens was no longer spinning. It was fractured, cracked down the middle like an enormous eye split in half, and the pieces shifted in the moonlight, reflecting back not my face but 1,000 others, some human, some not, all of them pressing against the glass as though they were trapped inside, their mouths moving in silent screams. And I knew then the light had not been meant to guide ships, but to hold something back, something ancient, something patient, and by failing to keep the rules, By letting my curiosity outweigh my terror, I had weakened it. I pressed my palm against the cold steel and felt the heartbeat of the lighthouse, slow and immense, pulsing with the rhythm of the tide. And behind me the door slammed shut, though I hadn't touched it, and the iron handle twisted until it bent, sealing me inside. And with nowhere left to run, I turned back to the broken lens just as it began to move, its pieces shifting apart like jagged teeth, and from the widening gap a hand emerged, long, pale, and webbed, dripping with brine and seaweed, its claws scratching against the floor as another hand followed, and then a face, bloated and eyeless, jaw unhinged wider than any human should, seawater spilling from its throat as it dragged itself into the chamber, and with every inch it gained, the air grew thicker, the chanting louder. And I finally understood the truth. The rules hadn't been meant to protect me. They had been meant to protect the world from what lived beneath the lighthouse. And now that it was free, there would be no putting it back. That'd be why the time I reached. What I knew was my final night inside the lighthouse. The air itself felt different, heavier, like the walls had learned to breathe, and each exhale pressed down on my chest, suffocating me in a way I couldn't fight off. And though I told myself 1,000 times I could still walk away, deep down I already knew that the lighthouse had wrapped its claws around me, that no matter how fast I ran or how far I went, this place wasn't something you escaped. It was something that claimed you. And as the black water slammed endlessly against the rocks outside, I realized the ocean was laughing at me, mocking me for thinking I was ever free. Because I wasn't. Not anymore. Not after breaking the rules. Not after hearing the voices whispering in the stairwell at night. Not after seeing the shadows move when there was no light to cast them, and when the lantern atop the tower lit itself, though I hadn't touched it. The beam cut across the endless darkness and landed directly on me. And in that moment it felt less like illumination and more like a spotlight, a cruel stage where the walls themselves were the audience, waiting to see if I'd finally surrender. And I could hear them, the ones who came before me, the keepers who'd vanished, their voices rising like a tide from beneath the floorboards, telling me it was too late, telling me I'd already become one of them, telling me the lighthouse didn't need men, it needed souls, and my legs carried me upward against my will, step after step after step, the spiral staircase narrowing until it felt like I was crawling through the throat of some enormous thing. And when I reached the lantern room, I saw the glass panels no longer showed the sea or the storm, but reflected back infinite versions of me. Each one older, each one more broken, each one with eyes that weren't mine, but belonged to the black water below. And as the foghorn groaned low and long, vibrating through my bones, I knew the last rule wasn't about survival. It was about acceptance, and I couldn't remember when I first started repeating the words aloud, but my mouth was moving without me, whispering the mantra I didn't know I'd been taught, promising loyalty to the tower, promising my body to the stone and my voice to the foghorn and my eyes to the beam. And I felt my skin stretch tight, cracking, my veins glowing faintly, with the same pale light that shone through the lens. And when I tried to scream, it came out as a hollow wail, the same sound that had carried over the water all these nights, the same sound that ships heard before they broke apart on the rocks. And I understood then that it wasn't the horn. It was never the horn. It was the keepers themselves. It was me. It was us, an endless chain of voices warning others to stay away while luring them closer. And the glass cracked and shattered as the storm outside bled into the room. Rain and seawater rushing in. But I wasn't wet. I wasn't cold. Because I wasn't a man anymore. Not really. Just a shape of light and shadow locked forever in the turning of the lens. And as my body fell to the floor, useless and husked, I saw my reflection step forward from the glass, smiling with my mouth though my corpse lay broken at its feet, and the beam swung wide across the sea again, searching for the next one, the next fool who thought they were hired for a job, when really they were chosen for a sacrifice. And my last human thought before the fog filled me completely was simple and crushing. The lighthouse doesn't need keepers. It keeps itself, and now I belong to it, forever.